This is the beginning of a brand new episode of Dive Cuts, and we are live on YouTube for not just Rock'em Plus subscribers, but for everybody. Everybody who saw the post on Blue Sky, who saw the post go up on Rock'em.plus. Everybody who had their notifications turned on. If you're subscribed to this channel, like you should be, you had your notifications turned on, and you get the notification that we're gonna go live. So we are live for all those people. I'm your host Sam Snelling. If you are watching on YouTube and you see me on your right, and you have not already subscribed to the channel, please do. I am your host. With me, as always, Mr. Matt Harris. Matt, how are you?
I'm well. It's the best holiday week of the year. The best holiday of the year is
Shots
upon
across the
us.
bow for Christmas lovers.
I mean, look, all you're doing is just putting blatant commercialism on top of what's already awesome about
Yeah.
Thanksgiving. Let's just be real crass about it. You don't love it for any other reason you get shit. That's why you love it, and that's fine. Just don't paint it as somehow nobler, like as a holiday than Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving has superior food, superior sporting options. You're not snowed under. Yeah, it's White Christmas. You love that if you're not the one out there shoveling or snow blowing. Yeah, so that's my first part. Second of all, it's feast week, which means that you have an excuse to like just turn on your television at 1 o'clock, at least Eastern time, and there's basketball on for at least 7 or 8 hours. So that's great for sickos like us. Third, my Toffees won at Man United today for the for the first time in 12 years. They did it with just 10 guys against 11. And how did they only have 10 guys? Well, one Toffee slapped another Toffee and got kicked out of the game, and they still won. So it's
So
come
I,
up
I
great.
I put in our Slack chat with Mr. Matt Watkins that I don't blame the guy. Like so Keene was the guy that got slapped, right?
Yeah,
We're gonna detour very quickly into like what happened because this is entertaining. Um, Keene was at fault there. Like the other guy, Ghana, right?
yeah. I mean, there could be. I think there was a question on who had the
Maybe you
clearance
don't
or
slap your teammate, but it looked like he was passing to Keene, who just stopped
yeah,
and ball
and it
watched.
nearly led to a goal. Doesn't
I,
matter. Everton scores 16 minutes later and then plays 10v11 and holds the fort. The other fun thing about today is this victory also pushes them above Liverpool in the standings for the first time in 10 years. So it's fantastic. It was a great Monday. I got basketball starting at noon. The Toffees trying to cripple my emotions only to deliver. And now we get to talk about everybody's favorite matchups. Missouri versus South Carolina State and Missouri Cleveland State. Who else could be better on a Monday
Missouri.
night?
So Feast Week is like one of like the greatest weeks of college basketball.
In danger,
Um,
but still great.
and it is a little in danger. The Players Era Festival is corrupted a bit of the MTEs that are usually rolling around this time, which is sunk a lot of the MTEs quite a bit as far as like their the level of competition on
Mm.
who you're getting to see. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think a lot of people are super keyed up for like Clemson, Georgia. At least not on the hardwood. That was maybe the most intriguing game, of the normal MTEs that we're kind of used to seeing. Maui is out there, and like arguably the best team in the tournament gets upset by Seton Hall. That's NC State. So like the regular tournaments that are usually sort of the marquee events have taken a hit because the Players Era Festival.
Mm.
Um, but Matt Dennis Gates doesn't believe in those MTEs. Uh, since since he's taken over, so this is year four. Um, is Wichita State, was that
Probably the
even
strong.
is that the strongest?
That's probably the strongest one. Yeah,
Was that even Thanksgiving?
that was somewhat. I think it may have been the week after, but
Yeah,
The,
last year was Lindenwood. If you remember, the day
I attended
before.
that one live. I
Oh,
watched.
that's
I
right.
wa-
Yeah, you were home seeing the parents and had nice seats
took
behind the bench.
Yeah, and then got to see that malaise up close. And I can't remember who else they had that week, but no, it wasn't SEMO that week. That was a couple years earlier. But these are the games where the students are gone, so that sucks any kind of like youthful energy out of the building.
But
And
that's also why most schools choose to play in these MTEs this week, is
yeah,
because nobody's on campus. So let's go someplace. Let's go to the Bahamas. Let's go to Maui. Let's go to San Diego. Let's go to Charleston. Um,
yeah. I mean, but as people have pointed out this weekend, which was I didn't realize until I started covering LSU when they did an MTE run, was they're incredibly expensive to take a team out somewhere to like play in the Bahamas or play it in a tropical climate for 3 days. Just schlep basically 30 people like in the program, and then if you include spouses in there, it's incredibly expensive to take teams on these trips. I think this week, various people said like the median cost to like go to Maui was 500K for a team, and back in the day that used to be awesome before you could pay players. Like I can't give you a check, but I can give you 3 days in Maui. Do you have to play basketball while you're there? Yes, but you also get to play basketball in Maui or in the Bahamas or in somewhere in Florida or the Virgin Islands. Like Konzo took them there. That and the appeal was you got three usually quality games. Well, now, like you said, the players era is kind of like hoovered up the best of the best. So, do you really want to fly? Like USC played Boise State today in the opening game of the Maui. Do you want to drag your like team from the Midwest out to play Boise State in Maui, maybe a quad two game
yeah,
on your team sheet? And if you lose that one, you may draw another possible quad two game. So I think it's just gotten harder to justify making those trips. At the same time, I get what the players era sounds great on paper. You get participants get $1 million in NIL, which that's a starter for your roster if you want to look at it that way. But the other thing is you don't control the scheduling there. Like you sign up and you usually sign a multi-year deal, and the event organizers set your schedule, which is just kind of crazy that college coaches who are not control freaks in any way have given like just sign over control for 3 games of scheduling in Las
mm,
Vegas. And while Las Vegas is in the continental United States, which is handy, it's expensive to visit Vegas for 3 days. So I don't know if it's necessarily solving any more problems than we were having with normal MTEs. Anyway, there's a long way of saying there's no real good schedule solution for Thanksgiving week. You're either a fan that can't go to an MTE, can't go to the players era, or if your team is playing in town, they're probably playing a body bag game. So there's not really a great solution for this week, but we've talked about that before.
So we recorded after Missouri played Prairie View A&M and expressed our disappointment, Matthew, in the way that they finished that game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I think we both noted that it was very likely that they would come out and look a little better against South Dakota. They did. They played South Dakota. It was close-ish in the first half because South Carolina was making a fair amount of threes. Once those kind of dried up, Tigers kind of ran away with it. Final score of that game was 102-68. It went about how I kind of thought it would. I didn't know if they would end up winning by as many points as they did, 34. But I figured it would be kind of one of these games where South Carolina would give them some fits early.
I mean South Dakota.
South Dakota. That's right. South Carolina State's coming up next.
Yeah.
So all these Souths are getting mixed up. Yeah. And so Missouri just steadily offensively punished them at the rim,
Mm.
overwhelmed them, and made enough threes to expand things a little bit as well. Any big takeaways from the butt kicking they put on the Yotes?
Uh, I thought they diversified things offensively. I think in the first 5 or 6 games it had gotten kind of tedious watching them on offense, which sounds weird for a team that's a top 15 offense, but they had been scoring pretty much off secondary breaks, an occasional live ball turnover, or playing 5 out pick and rolls or 4 out pick and rolls. And I mean, it's great that you can win playing like vanilla of the vanilla offense, but that's sort of one of the things about this schedule that is, at least for us who like to kind of see incremental growth and kind of like to see how they evolve the rotation is, okay, what are they going to do when they have to run real offense? What's that going to look like? And I think the South Dakota game really gave us that kind of look at it, and that was probably because Sean Phillips wasn't in there, and you could play lineups that I think had bigs that could space out a bit more and could kind of play the way Missouri wants to when they're playing in like Princeton style stuff, or they're playing in sets where they're inverting the floor, and that's getting bigs out of the paint and playing them up near the elbows at the top of the key. And that really, I think, gave you some sense of what it looks like when you've got that sort of spacing and that floor balance in play, and really just how much open sort of acreage it creates for a guy like Mark Mitchell, how much it creates room for those guys to kind of have room to cut or roll into post ups. It was just a little bit nicer to see some more structured offense outside of come down, set a ball screen, and then play out of it. So I thought that was good. They were really, really good. They showed some diversity there. I wrote about that in lineup review, so if you go to the site, you can look at the lineup review for that. And there are clips in there, so rather than bore people by explaining actions, you can go watch about 2 minutes of clips and sort of see what they were running. They still ran some base stuff, like some bare bones stuff, and did it pretty well. But I thought that was probably the biggest takeaway. It was just nice to see them kind of get to some chapters of the playbook that we hadn't really seen and see what that looks like with new personnel. And I thought, it was just, in general, it was nice to see them close. They came out in the second half. I thought they did a good job staying engaged defensively. I thought, they finally followed Matt Watkins' advice and extended the defense, applied pressure. So I thought that was nice. We got to see them kind of extend their defense, apply more pressure, and kind of get a little bit more, not complex, but a little bit more structured offensively. And they looked good doing both, and I think that was important. And obviously getting Honor Batang back in the mix and knocking rust off was good there. But I just thought in general, they kind of looked a little bit like the team that you expect to see in SEC play with the kind of sets and offense they were running, and maybe a little bit more defensive diversity. So I thought that was kind of the big thing, and that's what you want in these types of games, and is to start seeing that kind of stuff as we move midway through non-con.
Yeah, no, I agree with a lot of that. I think it's interesting. There's been quite a bit of focus on like Sean Phillips, and we've talked a lot about Sean Phillips and the things that he does well, things that he doesn't really do all that well. So it is noticeable when he's missing from the lineup, and you have a super strong performance.
We had 2 super strong performances.
Yeah,
BMI,
and
they're pretty good.
and Luke Northweather obviously gets to play a little bit, but I thought like the big thing is that it puts Javon Porter into more of a natural spot.
Yeah.
A guy who I think that like they've done a good job kind of getting him going the last couple games, and he's looked better even the game before with Sean in the lineup. But a guy who they've sort of thought was really going to help them this year had some kind of early bumps, and that's to be expected. But he really kind of stepped into his own. I mean, obviously, anytime a guy goes 9 for 9,
yeah.
you're going to sing his praises. But I do like the type of shots that he was taking. He was focused on like basically hammering guys right around the rim. He's got great touch around the rim. He should be able to kind of convert those shots. So that was really heartening to see. And yeah, I think getting Boat back in the lineup is really, really important. He's a guy who I think we all thought looked fantastic. I think what we were kind of hoping we would see from him against Kansas State. So it was a little worrisome to see him not in the lineup until now. You get some rust knocked off hopefully he looks a little bit more, under control and kind of playing within himself like he was against Kansas State and doing that, in the next couple games. Um, but yeah, I mean, look, you blew the doors off of a team who was pretty well coached and can, they run good stuff. They're a little overmatched athletically,
Yeah,
but like you did what you had to do. Now you've got two more games. You kind of have to do the same thing.
yeah. Uh, South Carolina State's going to be one of those teams too, and I think both teams this week. I think the last three teams that they've played have really are helpful in this sense. All three are comfortable playing at fast tempo. None of them are going to be shocked by that. None of them are going to be overwhelmed by that. South Carolina State, I think, is number one in bench minutes. They've been a top 10 team in bench minutes every year that Eric Martin's been there as head coach. So he's going to roll bodies through. He's going to press a lot. They've got, I think, six guys taller than 6'8" and two guys taller than 6'10". So they've got legitimate size that they can throw out in some lineups, and one of the best things they do is crash the offensive glass. So is it a 350 team in KenPom? Yes. Should you handle them rather efficiently? Yes. But it's a team that's going to be comfortable at the pace you play. They're going to be comfortable, under pressure and under duress. It's not going to bother them. They've got some size that can match you in certain spots. And they've got two guys that can shoot it pretty well off the catch. And they've got a point guard that does a pretty good job making decisions. So should they be a team that really stresses you? Maybe not outside the first 5 to 8 minutes, but you can see kind of what they offer is they're going to be comfortable going at Missouri's speed. Kind of the
Mm-hmm.
same thing with Cleveland State, coached by Rob Summers. Think he
Hey,
knows how Missouri wants to play. With Dallin King on his staff, think Dallin doesn't know what happens in practices. So, I mean, they are struggling defensively in year one for Rob Summers, but I think I checked today, they're 190 in offensive efficiency, which doesn't sound impressive, but I think that's third or fourth best in the horizon right now. So
yeah,
for their level, they've got a pretty perky offense. They've got a couple stretch fours who are pretty skilled and can score it. They go about 8 or 9 deep, and again, they're going to be comfortable at pace, and they're going to basically run what you run. So it's a week where you hope your talent gap manifests itself, but these are teams that if you look stylistically at them, they're kind of good pairings for what Missouri wants to do, and they're going to kind of test some things that Missouri wants to be good at. And I think the biggest thing to me is they didn't just go out and get a bunch of low majors who want to play 68 possessions and grind it. They got teams that want to run and want to play at tempo and want to play with them. So I think it's going to be one of those things where you can't just come in and overwhelm someone stylistically. You're
yeah.
going to have to execute consistently. You're going to have to do what you need to do, particularly defensively, and be solid and handle your business. So I think that's what this week is good for if you're looking for a reason why this week might be helpful for them as they move along and get ready to gear up for a big jump in quality of competition next month.
Well, and it is kind of interesting, that Missouri has sort of lined up this you know weak non-conference schedule. I think it's fair to say. The rest of the SEC is not really doing its part, and I don't know that we need to like spend a whole lot of time diving into like what the league is dealing with. But I do think it's worth kind of pointing out and taking a moment to sort of look at a screenshot of what the league looks like right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because last year the SEC was so good in the non-conference that once you got to conference play, like everybody was good. There were going to be
Mm-hmm.
no bad losses, and it showed that there were no bad losses, and the fact that uh, you got 14 teams in the NCAA tournament, teams that went 6-12 in the league, which is frankly absurd to have that kind of record in a league. But when the league is that good, and credit to Oklahoma for doing what they needed to do in the non-conference schedule, they beat some really good teams in the non-con that year. It has not really gone that way for the SEC this year, and if you're like, it hasn't sunk the league. Like the league to me, and I made this comparison, I think in our chat, but I can't remember if it was earlier today or yesterday, where I basically said, is SEC basketball also SEC football? In that there are 16 teams, they're all at least pretty good,
Yeah.
but there's nobody who's like gonna blow your doors off.
Mm-mm.
There's nobody who's gonna, that like there's no Boston College, in the ACC that's just atrocious, and losing that game is, kind of considered, an embarrassing loss. South Carolina was, I think, it's still currently the worst team. They've lost two straight at the Greenbrier. Is that right? Are they at Greenbrier?
Yeah, they were in West Virginia in Appalachia.
Yeah, so the Greenbrier tip-off. And so South Carolina, 88 in KenPom, worst team in the SEC by KenPom rating. They lost a 7-point game to Butler, who's 48th in KenPom, and a 2-point game to Northwestern, which I believe was on a last-second shot, who's 47th in KenPom. So competitive, but the problem is there's still losses.
This is the thing. I don't get really worked up about like a team like South Carolina because they've only dropped 2 spots in KenPom since the season began. Like they are disappointing results.
Well, I was using them, like as an example of like, they're not winning. The SEC in general is not winning the kinds of games it did last year.
No,
and it's causing an overall sink.
Yeah, I think the bigger story right now is probably Texas A&M and Mississippi State. Texas A&M entered today at number 66 in KenPom. That is 31 spots lower than when they started 3 weeks ago. That's hard to do. But then Mississippi State said, no, we'll one-up you. They're at 70th in KenPom. That's a 44-spot drop. They fell 24 spots in 2 days after playing at the Hall of Fame Classic in Kansas City. They lost by 21 to Kansas State, a team Missouri beat pretty handily. Mississippi State was a 1-point favorite in that game. If you lose by 22 points to the number 40 team in KenPom, you're going to take a drop. Then they lost the next day to 103rd ranked New Mexico. So that sunk them. And then you just look across the rest of the league. Oklahoma's doing about what we expected. They're down 7 spots, but they got thumped by a Gonzaga team that is better than people I think probably thought coming into the year. Yeah. Then they lost a barn burner to Nebraska on a neutral site. So they're down. But I think the bigger deal is, you look at Kentucky. Kentucky lost by 15 at the Champions Classic last week. They're down to 12th in KenPom. That's an 8-spot drop. They were supposed to be one.
And they like topped off at first before they lost to Louisville.
Yeah, they dropped about 10.
They ascended before they fell.
Yeah, but they're 0-2 in marquee games. Auburn played Houston pretty close on a neutral in Birmingham, so I can't really ding them for that. Ole Miss is down 11 spots to 35th. Arkansas has had 2 real scraps. They had one, I think, with Samford, and then they needed some late officiating help, some might say, to get past Winthrop last week. Texas hasn't had as bad a luck in those games, but they got blasted by 15 against Duke. I think when I looked at it today, the SEC is 8-16.
Texas also hasn't played anybody ranked higher than 336th since they lost to Duke.
But point is,
they are going to play Arizona State today, so we'll see where they're at.
Yeah, but the league's 8-16 against other high major teams, and Florida owns two of those wins, Alabama owns 2 of those wins, and Georgia owns 2 of those wins. So the other 13 teams in the SEC have combined for a whopping 2 wins.
I would also point out Georgia's wins are against 95th ranked Georgia Tech, which was a close game, and 90th rated Xavier, which was also a close game. They beat Xavier by 1. They beat Georgia Tech by 5.
They needed a
So
jumper with 10 seconds left to beat Xavier on Friday night. So what we're saying here, folks, is the league has not been good in marquee games outside of Alabama, which has probably two of the best wins in the country at this point over
yeah,
St. John's and last week against Illinois. So props to Nate Oates and co. You're doing your job. You're getting marquee W's for the league. Everyone else, it's time to fix the problem. And this is a week where I think you can start to rectify that. There are going to be some teams at Maui. There's some teams at the Players Era. There's some teams that are, I think, playing out at an event in Palm Springs, California, where they're going to be able to get some wins, but should have an opportunity to win. So, point is, the league is given back some of its cushion in the first 3 weeks to the Big Ten. And, I think I wrote this today. Missouri plays 5 games against Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and Mississippi State. 3 of those are on the road. In the preseason, those would have been quad 2 games. Now, if those teams continue to sink and they fall below 75th in the net, you go from having maybe 1 quad 3 game in SEC play, and that's against South Carolina, to having 4. And if you drop 2 of those, that's a problem on the team sheet. So that's looking way down the road. That's a loose hypothetical right now. But what we're talking about is the bottom of the league in the bottom 4 or 5 spots right now has gotten a little bit rickety. And when you schedule a bunch of quad 4 teams, 9 of them, some might say, and bank on the strength of the SEC to carry you over, you're rooting hard for those teams at the bottom to hold up their end of the bargain, and that's not happening right now. So Missouri's not, this is way down the line, but if you're Missouri and you've scheduled 9 of these quad 4 games and you've said, well, we're probably going to get quite a few quad 1 and 2 opportunities in SEC play, well, you might lose 3 quad 2 opportunities before December even gets here.
yeah.
So that's where the SEC, that's why we care so much right now about what the SEC is doing in non-con, which it might seem weird after 3 weeks, but the SEC was cutting a lot of wood and storing it away this time last year, and Missouri benefited from that. They're behind schedule right now, so that's what we're watching right now. Is if those bottom 4, 5, or 6 spots in the SEC slip from quad 2 to quad 3 games, come January and February. We'll see, but has not been the most auspicious start for the league.
And I will point out Mississippi State. So if you're not watching this live, recording this Monday evening at about 8:30, Mississippi State just hit a 3 to cut New Orleans. Yeah, the University of New Orleans, who is at Mississippi State, cut the lead to 5 with 1:25 to play.
Let's go Privateers.
Yeah, so things aren't looking great for Jan Squad, and I think when you are kind of set up with your non-conference schedule, I think this kind of goes back to one of the things that we've talked about is Missouri doesn't have a lot of opportunities to play quad 1 and quad 2 games. They've got 3 maybe coming up, depending on how Notre Dame holds up. And then, KU will very likely finish as a quad 1 game because that's on a neutral court. So all they just have to do is stay in the top 50. Illinois will certainly be quad 1 because, again, neutral court, have to stay in the top 50.
Yeah.
But that's really only 3 opportunities. And look, the very likelihood of Missouri being 8-0 going to Notre Dame, if you're able to get that, great. But there's been nobody to really challenge you at this point. We could talk about look, they played kind of bad down the stretch of Prairie View. Minnesota kind of challenged them in the first half, in that game. But, Southeast Missouri, it was a close game. But that's not really being challenged. And even against Southeast Missouri, I never really felt like Missouri was not going to win the game. Like watching and there's been there's been games against quad four opponents in recent years where you're like, oh god, like are they going to lose this game?
Yeah.
And some of Konzo's years and some of the rougher rough Dennis Gates year a couple years ago. There's definitely like points where you're like, oh my god, like they might lose this. I never felt that against SEMO.
No.
So like this is a long way of saying like if the SEC is going to do this, it takes away your ability to like load up on these quad four games uh, and as somebody who hosts a podcast about Missouri basketball and has to spend the month of November talking about Missouri basketball, I would like a little bit more of a compelling, subject to talk about. And frankly, like I think this Tiger team is going to be a good team. But we're 6 games in. We are still kind of missing a couple bodies, but we don't really know what we have yet. And
I mean, if you look just purely based off the margins, Missouri's actually outperformed their projected margins here by 11 points, and they've dropped 5 spots in KenPom because other teams are playing better schedules and getting better wins. Like Missouri's, and I think when we looked at it, we look at their defensive efficiency, it's ahead of pace for last year. Their offensive efficiency is on the same track. Like they're playing at about the same level that last year's team was. And they're slipping in KenPom and barely holding ground because they're not amassing quality wins. And the other thing that I think we wrote about a little bit on the board was if you schedule teams below 300, there is only one objective for doing that. It's to beat the ever-loving crap out of them and run up the margin. It's the only reason why, this is what Alabama's going to do. Alabama's going to play Gonzaga tonight, and it'll be their third top 15 game in the first 3 weeks. Nate Oates is going to... He doesn't need time to gel. He's not leaning into, we need some time to grow together. No, we're going to rip the Band-Aid off and figure out what we got. But he's also going to schedule some soft games below 250. Went back in Tuscaloosa. And the philosophy is schedule top 50 games for your Q1 shots and schedule below 350 to beat the piss out of people to run up your efficiency margins. Missouri does not schedule. Missouri gets 3 games baked in, 2 really, against quad 1 opponents in Kansas and Illinois, but Missouri does not treat sub 350 games as a chance to blast people into the sun. They use it, as we've said a lot, as a crash lab. They test out rotations. They try different stuff. I think I'm looking at a quad 1 game. They beat the margin by 1.6 points at Howard, underperformed by 18 points against SEMO. They beat the margin by 15 against VMI, underperformed the margin by 13 against Prairie View, and then overperformed the margin by 9 against last week against South Dakota. So if you take out the Minnesota game, Missouri has actually underperformed against all these quad 4 teams by about 5 points. Like, that's not how you help. These games aren't providing you any nutritional value. Now, Dennis Gates might say the value shows up later on when we know what guys work together and we know what combinations work and we've worked through things and we know what our style is. And that's a valid point. I would suggest you can still accomplish the same objectives against teams between 200 and 250 in KenPom, where the projected margin is 15 to 20 points. And if you have a good night, you overperform the margin by a significant amount.
Yeah.
This is a long way of saying Missouri is scheduling teams to tinker when they should be scheduling those teams to bash their brains in and run up a huge efficiency margin. They're scheduling games that don't really, I think, match the stated objective that they have, which is to gel and coalesce and experiment and see how these teams grow their identity. You can do that against teams that are slightly better. You don't need to schedule sub 300 teams to do that. So I think that's where my frustration comes in. You're you're doing something that actually creates a potential detriment to the stated goal that you have. And when March gets here and we hear people complain that, oh, they're 2 or 3 seed lines lower than we thought, we're going to say, again, you played a weak non-con schedule. So we've been over this before. I don't think it's going to change until there's a consequence of what happened to somebody like Texas A&M, where the NCAA committee says you didn't play anybody in non-con, so we're going to leave you out.
Yeah.
As long as they don't face that consequence, I don't think it's going to change. So we'll persist and continue to look at lineup data and read tea leaves.
You do your best to like break down, like how somebody looked against, South Dakota, overwhelming them with size. But yeah, so 2 games this week. Fortunately, it is feast week. There are other games to partake in. I do have like an update. Mississippi State did come back to took the lead. It is now tied. It is tied, but they did have the 1-point lead at one point. So we'll see kind of what happens with that. Next week, we'll actually be able to preview Notre Dame, which will be exciting, and probably Notre Dame and Kansas. So we'll actually get to talk about some opponents that matter. No offense to South Carolina State, Cleveland State. Please don't play better than we think you're playing. And let's get through Thanksgiving with relative ease and get to first week of December, where you get 2 very quality opponents, well coached teams, and your main rival. So we'll be back next Monday, I guess, to talk about those guys. And until if there's any like stuff you guys want to know, drop comments in these videos. We'll be happy to answer them. We are still going to try to keep these to under 40 minutes whenever possible, closer to 30, but that seems to be hard to do for us. So we'll be back next week, and hopefully to talk about an 8-0 Missouri. All right, thanks for tuning in, everybody.